Hey, welcome to this session from the Power Platform Well-Architected Framework. In this session, we're going to cover monitoring tools. This is recorded in Q3 of 2023. Before I begin, just want to say the views and opinions are my own. They do not reflect the company I work for. So let's go ahead and get started. So the attended audience, an overview of this is to discover and assist with defining a monitoring solution for the Power Platform. It's a technical discussion. At this point, we're going to try to be strategic in nature and provide specific solutions to common challenges. The intended audience includes stakeholders, decision makers, directors, architects, operations, and so on. So just to recap, what is monitoring? Why do I need a strategy and the tools we're going to go into? And so high-level monitoring is the ability to extract information about how your application and platform is being used, how it's performing in the evolution of your business data. Having a proper monitoring strategy as you're planning your solution is ideal, but you can have it really at any time. There's never a bad time to start implementing a monitoring strategy. So let's get into monitoring tooling. So, as of this recording, what monitoring tools are available out of the box for us for Power Platform and Dynamics 365? So I've listed several first-party tools, meaning tools that are available from Microsoft that are supported. They can be used for sources of monitoring. These include Microsoft Fabric, Azure Synapse Link, Azure Application Insights, Microsoft Dataverse API, Microsoft SQL Replica, and Microsoft Graph API. With that in mind, I want you to understand that each organization will have to solution how their monitoring is going to, what their strategy is and how they're going to monitor, what they want to monitor to deliver the data points that are relevant to signals that they're interested in. So where can I go to find signals and what signals should I look for? So I broke it down into three main areas: business data, the trends and analysis there. An example signal would be, what is my data telling me? What can I learn from the data I have? Tenant and environment level analysis. Are my makers able to use the platform? And how are they using the platform? Where are they going? What are they investing in and working with? And finally, operational data. So when an event happens, when something in my environment, my tenant happens, how can I be notified and take quick action? So business trends and analysis of the signal. Again, we said, what is my data telling me? Some examples I listed here. What does my async backlog look like? That's important for organizations who, may have a lot of async processes. Maybe they're doing some sort of data loads and they want to be able to monitor that backlog to ensure that they're, not getting into a spot where the backlog is growing and growing. They're not able to produce it. Is my team meeting its SLA? So a lot of these can actually be found from data. I included these two particular items because one of them includes sort of data that's within the Dataverse data store, but is more based on sort of the health of the system. In this case, the async operations, but then also business data that's pertinent to the business. So SLAs if we're using customer service in opening cases. So key roles that might be interested in business data trends are decision makers, stakeholders, and operations teams. Some of the tools listed here: Microsoft Fabric, Data Activator, Power Automate. So this top one we see here is actually showing the Dataverse native connection to Microsoft Fabric using the Synapse link and so on, which can then open us up to the Data Activator, which is right now currently in preview, but will give organizations the ability to set sort of thresholds and get alerted on data when thresholds have been met or exceeded, or all sorts of different possibilities. But having the data sort of drive the alerting there. You can also have it's kind of built off Power Automate, the what do they call it? The expressions. I forget the exact name for it, but it has Power Automate as sort of that logical engine behind to go do things like create Teams notifications, emails, alerts, and so on. I included here on the bottom one that's this concept's been around for a while, but I think it's important to call it out, which is using the SQL replica for Dataverse. So that allows us to connect to a data store that is a real-time replica of our primary data store. Not necessarily have to be concerned with things like throttling, and we can run traditional SQL statements. So a selective account, like if I want to get a number of rows out of a table, I can do things like that. So in this case, well, some solutions I've devised have actually connected to the TDS endpoint from an Azure function that's using just the traditional SQL connections, and then taking that information and putting it into App Insights or Log Analytics. So in this case, looking at the async operation backlog based on different states, providing a certain number, like say a sum of each one, and then that will allow us to then have Azure Monitor alerts monitor that and tell us, hey, we've crossed a certain threshold, and so on. For tenant and environment level analytics, the signal here, are my makers able to use, and how are they using the platform? Some examples that I've come up with are, is the platform available for me to use it, right? Can I actually, load up the platform and load my apps and run my flows and so on? Are my apps up to date? So we have environment application packages, tenant packages, make sure they're all up to date. So examples could be things from customer service or sales, some of those core rooms of the house and the solutions that back them, to things like Center of Excellence and so on. Are my apps compliant? Talking about Center of Excellence has a really great dashboard and area that focuses on the access of apps, like are there connection references being shared, are apps and flows orphaned, how are they just compliant, right? So the Center of Excellence does a really great job of that. And the key roles here, again, would be decision makers. Governance and adoption teams, I think, would be very interested in what data points can be collected via these endpoints here, and operations teams as well. So some of the tools I'm listing are tenant level analytics data export, which is what you see here, going into essentially a data lake. And Center of Excellence actually pushes that back into to Dataverse via Power BI dashboards and so on. There's also the collection of the data points from the Center of Excellence into Dataverse, which will help again when you talk about things like connecting to the TDS endpoint. Again, TDS endpoint also helpful here, right? We're connecting to the admin apps, the admin flows, all of that stuff to sort of build out that single pane of glass, right? I want to understand, who my users are, what teams are they part of, and business units and security roles do they have. All of that stuff can be had from Power Platform API, Business Applications Platform API, and as well as the Dataverse API or the Dataverse SQL replica. Finally, for operational data, when an event happens, how can I be notified? Examples are, hey, are users being throttled? Are integrations up and running? How long are data loads taking? Some key roles here: operations, governance, and adoptions teams. Some of the tools we'll see is the Power Platform API, the Business Applications Platform API. Maybe if you're using ALM and automated deployments, GitHub and DevOps APIs, Azure Functions, Power Automates, Azure Application Insights, and Azure Monitoring here. So what you see here on the top is a combination of the Power Platform API and the Graph API, which allows us to see, for instance, if there is any, let's see, what am I thinking of? For any apps that are available for updating, for any message center, any communications that are going to admin. So as an admin, I may not necessarily be logging into the message center. I may not necessarily get emails, but I want to get those messages from Microsoft that there could be a service disruption or something I need to take notice of. Again, using things like Azure Function, you can connect to these sources and push them to things like App Insights, Log Analytics, and so forth. For here, you'll see we have the GitHub, just representing sort of a DevOps API with Dataverse as well, going into Power Automate. So this allows us to for instance, look at pushing data from GitHub. So if, say, we have a deployment that failed, what actions inside of that deployment run failed, and what error messages were there. For Dataverse, maybe we have a custom API that's, for whatever reason, is connecting to an external service, and that external service is returning back 400s or 500 level error codes, pushing that information to application insights, and then we can get alerted and put our team to go be tasked with looking at that and remediating it here. So here's a example of different areas we have broken down into the same things we saw before: the business data, the tenant and environment data, and the operational data. We have the extraction layer with data activator, blob storage, power automating functions, and we have the alerting, analysis, and reporting layer with AI Builder, Monitor, Sentinel, and Power BI. So for the business data, again, the Dataverse API, the TDS endpoint, the Fabric, if we're working with the Parquet format tables and so on, using things like data activator to set thresholds, or having functions to go pull the APIs and ask it questions, or pull the SQL and ask it questions. For the tenant level in environment data, again, the Dataverse API can help us with that. Tell us things like, what are the org settings? What are the FCBs set? Power Platform API, what licensing do I have? What credits have I used? Things like that. We could pull that again with Power Automate with functions. There's some export out to blob storage, and that's where you can again write something to monitor the blob storage or connect directly to with Power BI. For operational data, there's the telemetry export, Azure Application Insights telemetry export feature for Dataverse and Power Automate, as well as some solutions within Dataverse like customer service. There's Microsoft Purview, which is the old security compliance center. So let's think of your audit, right, within the M365 area. That has a solution that will connect very well from Purview into Sentinel. So there's a solution there, and then you can use Sentinel for things like threat anomalies and just different detections, and use that machine learning as part of it there. And there's the service communications API that's part of Graph. Do things like functions and Power Automate to monitor when there's a change, to go send, say, for instance, a monitor to send an alert to a phone, to a Teams bridge, for instance. Looking here, again, data activator for setting the data thresholds, blob storage for storing long term so we can do analysis, Power Automate and functions for being that sort of intermediary layer of extraction. And then for AI Builder, using things like process mining to look at our processes within, say, Dynamics or Dataverse and how they could be improved. That also would include things like Copilot. We have Azure Monitor for alerting, for building out dashboards, things like that. Azure Sentinel to add that machine learning and add those algorithms looking for risky sign-ins, threat detection, et cetera. And finally, Power BI for rich visualizations to bring that single pane of glass in front of you. So by tying all these together, you can see starting here with your various data, depending on what you're interested in. If it's operational data, if it's business data, how the data tells me how the business is performing. As we talked before on defining a strategy, one of the things we look at is using monitoring to help us understand where our business is going, so we can stay ahead of that and see what tools may be available to us, or how we want to sort of organize our workforce and so on. So having having the data tell us what's happening is of utmost importance. For the tenant environment, how are people using it? Are they using it the right way? And again, the operational data, getting that end-to-end transaction there is going to be helpful. So here's some additional references. So again, I referenced the defining and monitoring strategy. I would start there if you haven't seen that already. There's a couple other YouTube videos. I'll add those all to the comments below. For Power Pages, an overview of Power Platform monitoring, which will use that Azure Application Insights data export. The Monitoring the Power Platform Bootcamp, it's a set of 10 to 15 videos that go into different areas of how to monitor the Power Platform. I put a link to a blog series I wrote called Monitoring the Power Platform, as well as a tool called the Organization Scanner that will do things like look for async operation backlog. We'll look for application packages that need updating, for solution history layering, for availability testing, etc. So please take a look at those references and give me your feedback on what you see. That's the end of this recording. Thank you so much for joining.